What if I told you that centuries ago, in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, Muslim women enjoyed rights, privileges, and protections that many women in Europe wouldn't even dream of for another 500 years? Could you survive as a woman in the Ottoman Empire? Would you thrive or fall victim to the misconceptions modern history often paints? Today, we're diving into a time when Islamic law shaped a civilization, and women weren't just surviving, they were leading, learning, and leaving legacies. You'll never look at history the same way again. So, before we time travel back, hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and join us on this epic ride through one of the most misunderstood eras in women's history. Ready? Let's find out if you could survive the Ottoman Empire as a woman. The Ottoman Empire, a sprawling Islamic superpower that lasted over 600 years, from the late 13th century to the early 20th. It ruled vast lands, stretching from Hungary to the Arabian Peninsula, and at its heart was Istanbul, once Constantinople, a city that blended East and West, tradition and innovation. But here's the twist. While most of Europe was still debating whether women should even read books, the Ottoman world, under Islamic law, allowed women to own property, divorce their husbands, and even sue men in court. Sounds more modern than medieval, right? So, if you were a woman in this empire, your fate wasn't sealed by gender. It was shaped by faith, law, and culture. Let's unravel what life was really like. And trust me, it's not what you think. Let's set the record straight. Islam, as interpreted in the Ottoman world, offered women a legal identity. In the 16th century, Muslim women could own property, run businesses, and inherit wealth, legally protected under Sharia. Compare that to 16th century Europe, where married women were often considered property themselves. In the Ottoman courts, women didn't need a man to represent them. They could walk into a court alone and bring a lawsuit against a man, and win. That's more legal autonomy than women had in most of Europe until the 19th century. Muslim women also received a mahr, a marriage gift that was theirs to keep. No dowries handed to fathers, no trading daughters like livestock. It wasn't perfect, of course, but for the time, revolutionary. So what did a typical day look like for a woman in the Ottoman Empire? If you were wealthy, you might live in a sprawling home with access to tutors, poetry readings, and silk embroidery. Women in these households were educated, especially in urban centers like Istanbul or Damascus. And if you were from the working class, you'd probably be selling goods at the market, baking bread, or managing the household budget. Many women ran family businesses, from bathhouses to bakeries. Wait, what? That's right, women running businesses in the 1500s. In fact, tax records from the time show thousands of women paying their own taxes, proof of independent incomes. While the West painted women as quiet and veiled, Ottoman women were negotiating, writing poetry, and shaping the economy.
Here's where things get really interesting. Did you know that Muslim women in the Ottoman Empire had access to education long before women's colleges existed in the West? Girls attended religious schools called madrasas, where they studied not just the Quran, but also literature, logic, and sometimes even astronomy and mathematics. Compare that to Europe, where girls' education was largely reserved for the elite or nuns. And get this, some women became respected scholars in their own right. Fatma Aliyev, for example, was a pioneering author who translated Western novels and wrote essays on women's rights in the 1800s. She wasn't the exception, just the one history remembered. In Ottoman libraries, you'd find women's names written in the margins of manuscripts. That's how they kept their voice alive, literally.
Forget what you think you know about the harem. In the Ottoman Empire, the harem wasn't some exotic fantasy palace. It was the center of political strategy, education, and influence. Yes, the harem was where the Sultan's female family members and wives lived, but among them were some of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Enter Kosum Sultan, a woman who ruled as regent for her sons and grandson. She influenced foreign policy, managed alliances, and appointed key officials. That's not a concubine, that's a political powerhouse. The harem educated women in poetry, law, languages, and even economics. It was less of a prison and more of a finishing school for empire building. Imagine growing up in a palace where women plotted diplomacy while sipping sherbet. That's the Ottoman harem, and yes, you could have thrived there.
Marriage in the Ottoman Empire wasn't a woman's only destiny, and it certainly wasn't a trap. Islamic law required a woman's consent before marriage. No forced I do under Ottoman law. And get this, if a husband failed in his duties, a woman could initiate divorce. That's right, divorce, centuries before most Western countries allowed it. Can you imagine a woman in 1500s England suing for divorce? She'd be burned as a heretic. But in Ottoman courts, women filed for divorce over neglect, abuse, or even failure to provide emotional support. The law backed them. And remember that mahr, the marriage gift? If a marriage ended, it was hers to keep. Financial independence mattered. So if you were a woman back then, marriage was a partnership, not a cage.
Now here's something mind-blowing. In the Ottoman legal system, women didn't just participate, they held power. From Istanbul to Sarajevo, court records show women suing for unpaid debts, land disputes, custody battles, and winning. These women appeared before male judges, sometimes unaccompanied, and cited Islamic law in their defense. Their testimony was valid, their signatures binding, their voices recorded, and sometimes they sued men in power and won compensation. Then, in contrast, many Western societies denied women the right to testify or even appear in court. So, could you survive Ottoman law as a woman? If you knew your rights, you'd thrive.
Time to talk money, because Ottoman women had it. Muslim women owned shops, invested in waqfs, charitable endowments, and even operated rental properties. One woman in 17th century Aleppo managed dozens of rental homes and used the profits to support local schools. In Istanbul, market stalls were registered under women's names. Some even formed female business networks. Women had legal rights to their earnings, and husbands couldn't touch them without permission. Meanwhile, European women couldn't legally own property unless they were widows. So, if you were a clever Ottoman woman, you could build wealth, reinvest, and pass it on to your daughters. Sound like survival? More like thriving. Think Ottoman women weren't involved in science or the arts? Think again. Take Fatma Aliyev, philosopher, novelist, and early feminist. She argued for women's rights using both religious texts and rational logic. Or consider Aisha Sultan, patron of architecture and scholarship. Her foundation supported libraries and women's hospitals. In astronomy, women studied the stars in private circles. Some taught astrology to royal family members.
Their names didn't always make the history books, but their fingerprints are everywhere. They funded bridges, built schools, and shaped the very infrastructure of the empire. Compare that to the West, where women weren't admitted into universities until the 1800s. So yes, Ottoman women weren't just surviving history, they were writing it. Here's a term you may have never heard before, but it changed the lives of millions. Waqfs. A waqf was an Islamic endowment, like a trust, set up to fund public services like hospitals, schools, water fountains, and mosques. And guess what? Many of these were established and managed by women. Powerful Ottoman women, from sultanas to businesswomen, set up waqfs that still serve people today. They created entire networks of public kitchens, orphanages, and universities centuries before social welfare systems existed. One of the most famous was Harem Sultan, wife of Suleiman the Magnificent. She funded bathhouses, soup kitchens, and a hospital complex in Jerusalem, still known as the Haseki Sultan Imaret. In many cases, these women wrote the legal documents themselves, detailing who would benefit and how. Modern-day philanthropy? The Ottomans and their women were doing it 500 years ago.
Let's talk healthcare, because yes, women played a role here too. While medical degrees weren't handed to women, that didn't stop them from becoming midwives, herbalists, and healers, often trained by other women or religious scholars. Midwives in the Ottoman Empire were respected professionals. They received official licenses and were crucial in both royal births and village deliveries. Women passed down generational knowledge about pregnancy, nutrition, and remedies, forming the backbone of women's healthcare. And in elite circles, some women financed entire hospital wings. Hürrem Sultan's Waqf included a women's hospital and a mental health center in the 1500s. Mental health, women's care, public clinics, all funded by Ottoman women using Islamic charitable principles. They weren't just passive patients. They were healers, educators, and financiers. You might be wondering, what did women wear, and was the veil forced? Dress in the Ottoman Empire was guided by modesty, but also by class, culture, and personal style. Urban women often wore long, flowing robes embroidered with silk and gold thread. Yes, they wore veils, but it wasn't universal or uniformly strict. In some cities, women wore sheer face coverings, in others, just a scarf. In rural areas, sometimes no veil at all. Islamic modesty allowed for regional interpretation, not one-size-fits-all enforcement. And Ottoman fashion was fabulous. Layered dresses, bejeweled belts, embroidered slippers. Women expressed identity through their wardrobe with flair. Today, modest fashion is trending, but Ottoman women, they were the original influencers.
Here's a plot twist. Not all Ottoman women were Muslim. The empire was a mosaic of faiths, with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim women living side by side. Under the millet system, different religious communities had autonomy in family law, but Muslim legal principles often set the broader tone, and many non-Muslim women used Sharia courts for better protections. Yes, Christian and Jewish women chose to go to Islamic courts because the rulings were more favorable. Where else in the medieval world did minority women feel legally safer in a Muslim court than their own? Only in the Ottoman Empire. Women of different faiths influenced cuisine, music, birth rituals, and education, blending cultures into a rich, female-driven legacy. If women in the Ottoman Empire had all this freedom, why does the world think otherwise? Well, blame the European travelers. Many 18th century Western visitors couldn't access women's spaces, so they imagined them, literally. They described Ottoman women as locked away, passive, and mysterious. Their harem stories? Mostly fiction, sold to Western readers who craved scandal and spice. The reality was far more nuanced. Behind the veil were poets, businesswomen, philanthropists, and educators. Western art showed Ottoman women lounging in luxury, but court records show them filing legal documents, managing estates, and sponsoring architecture. It's like confusing Netflix dramas with real life. So, next time you see an oil painting of a Turkish concubine, ask yourself, what's the real story? You now know better.
Let's talk about one of the most misunderstood topics: modesty. In the Ottoman Empire, Islamic dress wasn't about silencing women. It was about creating safe space for dignity and movement. Women wore layered garments, yes, but these weren't cages, they were status symbols. Fabric, embroidery, and color told the world about your education, class, and taste. Even face coverings were fluid. In cosmopolitan cities like Istanbul or Cairo, women often revealed their faces in markets or homes. The hijab wasn't imposed. It was chosen, a spiritual act, not a societal sentence. Compare that to Victorian Europe, where women's fashion was often physically painful. Corsets, whalebone, and modesty boards ruled the day. Ottoman modesty wasn't oppression, it was power, tailored to the woman wearing it.
Let's put names to the legacy. Sultan. You've heard her name, but did you know she ruled the empire for nearly 30 years? As Valide Sultan, mother of the Sultan, she influenced decisions in wars, international treaties, and royal successions. She wasn't just advising the throne, she was the throne. Then there's Mirima Sultan, daughter of Suleiman the Magnificent, who commissioned mosques, caravansaries, and hospitals. She worked with architect Mimar Sinan, the Ottoman equivalent of Da Vinci, to leave behind structures still standing today. And Nurbanu Sultan. She founded schools for girls and wrote to Venetian officials in fluent Italian as a diplomat. These weren't just royal figures, they were nation builders, architects of legacy, and symbols of what women could achieve in a world that listened.
So, why don't we learn this in school? The short answer: colonial narratives. As European empires rose, they painted the Muslim world as backward, a convenient myth to justify conquest. And Ottoman women, with their courts and contracts, didn't fit the helpless victim story. So they were erased. Textbooks simplified and often distorted Islamic history. Harem, sexualized. Hijab, demonized. Female agency, ignored. But scroll through Ottoman archives, and women are everywhere, notarizing deeds, founding schools, commanding palaces. Now modern historians are rediscovering their footprints, and we're rewriting the narrative, one fact at a time. And you, yes, you, are now part of that rediscovery. How does the Ottoman woman compare to a woman today? She had legal protections in marriage, she could earn her own money, she could go to court, win, and walk away independent. That's more than some women today in both the East and the West can claim. In fact, many Muslim-majority countries are only now trying to recover those early Islamic rights that got buried under colonial laws and cultural shifts. Meanwhile, in the West, women still battle for equal pay, maternity leave, and legal safety in relationships. The Ottoman woman wasn't perfect, but she wasn't powerless. She was a sister, scholar, queen, judge, mother, merchant, and mystic. And that begs the question, are we moving forward or catching up? So, what can today's world learn from Ottoman women? First, legal empowerment. Women had contracts, court access, and financial independence centuries ago. Rights weren't begged for, they were written into the system. Second, education mattered. From the harem to the madrasa, women were encouraged to read, think, and lead. Third, community. Women funded schools, hospitals, even water fountains, showing that influence didn't have to be loud to be lasting. And finally, balance. Spirituality and ambition weren't enemies. Women could be devout and driven, modest and mighty. In a world still wrestling with gender roles, the Ottoman woman is a reminder that faith, feminism, and freedom aren't mutually exclusive. If anything, they're ancient partners.
Let's ask it again. Could you survive the Ottoman Empire as a woman? If you were educated, ambitious, and understood your rights, you'd not only survive, you'd thrive. You could run a shop, shape the court, fund a hospital, or rule an empire from behind a silk curtain. Sure, there were limits. Class mattered. So did location. But the system, when followed as intended, offered a framework that many today are still fighting for. So, no, the Ottoman woman wasn't caged in stone walls or shadowed by veils. She was written into law, whispered in poems, carved into marble, and etched across continents. Her story isn't one of survival, it's one of presence. So ask yourself, if you lived then, would you be a shadow or a force?
You've just traveled through time, peeled back the myths, and uncovered a story that history books forgot to tell. Ottoman women weren't footnotes, they were chapters. And maybe the real question isn't just, could you survive? It's, how much would you contribute? If this journey changed the way you see history, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and drop a comment about the most surprising fact you learned today. There's more to history than swords and empires. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions happen in quiet rooms, led by women with ink, voice, and vision. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay curious.
Before we wrap up, we want to make something clear. This story wasn't told to belittle any culture, religion, or nation. Not even close. It was a deep dive into a piece of history that's often misunderstood, or worse, ignored entirely. Our goal? To shed light, not cast shadows. To celebrate how empowered women have always existed, in every corner of the world, even when history forgot to write them down. By exploring stories like this with facts, context, and empathy, we get closer to the full human picture. Because understanding each other's past, that's how we build a smarter future. With that in mind, thank you for listening with an open heart and an open mind.